Noah's Ark has been rediscovered in the southern gorge of Greater Mount Ararat, called Agredagi, between 3,900 to 4,700 meters above sea level, located 4 to 11 meters under the surface of the gorge, under many strata or layers of rock and ice. The site is certainly a maritime barge. Not only do you have the hull and many of the walls that angle inward toward the central keel, but you also have the seafaring woods of Cupressa sempervirens, Mediterranean cypress, oak, and teak. The site is covered from the exterior and interior with two types of sealant, cypress sap, and also petroleum bitumen sealant. The site exhibits all the characteristics of an ancient maritime barge, namely the use of coke and dowel joinery. Also, in the interior of the structure that measures 158 meters in length, there are thousands of cages for animals. And we know this from the non-skeletal remains, the feces, the hair, the fur, from every type of animal, mammals, birds, amphibians, reptiles, and insects. Also in the interior of the barge, there's small habitations for very few humans. And one of the notable characteristics is all the furniture is adhered to the walls. There's no free-floating furniture. It's all attached to the walls, similar to modern barges or other vessels, to prevent the furniture from being a safety issue during rough seas. Also, in the maritime barge is huge ballast features running the length of the barge on the third deck. There's 3 decks, and the cages measure from 20 centimeters in width to in excess of 4 meters. Not only are the animal byproducts or the animal remains very interesting, but also the archaeobotanical remains are remarkable. Every type of pre-domesticated or proto-domesticated cereal grain, also the late Epipaleolithic diet of chickpea, cicer, pea, pisum, and Vicia urvilia, or bitter vetch, is located in huge cargo holds. They're lined with bundles of wattle, tree stems, also lined with clay to act as an early desiccant to prevent moisture from building up in the cargo holds. Another feature is the sloping ramps that lead up and down to the thousands of cages for the different types of animals, and also the perches for the birds. So now the question remains is why and how this enormous prehistoric archaeological site was concealed for over 2,000 years, since 247 BC. And now we're going to discuss Mkrtich Khrimian's 4 final orders before he passed away in 1907. As we discussed previously, Mkrtich Khrimian, or Khrimian Khaidrig, Papa Khrimian, was very influential in the Armenian community. He was the Catholicos of the Armenian Apostolic Church from 1982 to 1907. And he was also very instrumental in pushing for Armenian independence from Ottoman Turkey. He was not appreciated by the Ottoman Turks, and by the end of his life, several very dire events occurred, with Turkish ministers and individuals that were Armenian and friendly to the Turkish regime being killed through the terror tactics of Sevkach and other Armenian militia. The Armenians were retaliated against by the Turks. Also, Mkrtich Khrimian led a delegation during the Treaty of Berlin against the Turks to demand that Western Armenia, the area around Greater Mount Ararat, be returned to Armenian sovereignty. Three events occurred. First, Abdul Hamid, who was the leader of the Ottoman Turks, created a pan-Islam set of legislation and orders that anyone who is not Islamic would have their livestock and their possessions confiscated from them. What resulted was hundreds of thousands of Armenians dying during what they call the Hamidian Massacre. The other issue was that, opposed to the Catholicos and the Armenian Apostolic Church, was the rise of Marxist contingents within the Armenian people that said that the Armenian people should resort to Marxism and a Marxist revolution against the Turks, vice the traditional Catholicos or Armenian Apostolic Church. The final problem was that Tsarist Russia, that originally supported Armenian independence, now turned against Armenian independence and said that Armenia should be an oblast, or a state, a province within Russia. So all three issues worked against Armenian independence. Also, at the end of Khrimian's life, in 1907, he was in very poor health. But what he did just before he died was very important to the concealment of the Ark. He issued 4 orders. Now, the first order was for the Armenian guides to cover all the tunnels on Greater Mount Ararat that led into these worship areas that were right at apertures or holes that led into Noah's Ark. Remember, the Armenians didn't allow anyone to go inside Noah's Ark. They could basically worship the Ark from these little worship areas and leave votive objects like jugs of wine or jugs of milk, but they could not go in. Khrimian ordered them to fill all the tunnels. And what this has resulted in is very telltale locations of the tunnels. Basically, you have what looks like, for archaeologists, a post mold, where you have the dark silt sand loam, ovals and circles of dark silt sand loam surrounded by the lighter glacial scree. It's very obvious that they covered these tunnels. So it's very easy for archaeologists to find the location of these tunnels into the interior of Noah's Ark. The second order, according to the descendants of the Ark Guides, is controversial. Here, Khrimian, remember, spent much time in Jerusalem, and he was what they call an antiquarian, which is an early form of archaeology. He was very interested in the artifacts. The second order he gave was for the Armenian guides to take all the artifacts that they could get their hands on from the interior of the structure and from the worship areas at the entrances to the site. Remember, the interior of Noah's Ark, it's from the late Epipaleolithic period, from 13,100 to 9,600 BC. So no pottery, but lots of wood, tools, organic remains, a lot of stone bowls, pestles, wood mortars, and also wood vessels that are covered with clay material and then burned. So a precursor to pottery. All of these were ordered by Khrimian for the Ark Guides to transport them to what is now the Republic of Georgia. It was the Kingdom of Georgia, now it's the Republic of Georgia. And as much as 1,500 artifacts were carried, according to the Ark Guides, into the Republic of Georgia. And it's a huge catastrophe for archaeologists because it destroys context and proveniences of these locations of these artifacts throughout the Ark. A real problem. But this is what happened. I've been able to see 6 assemblages And so they range from the late Epipaleolithic, the stone, wood, bone artifacts, to all the way to 1907, where Khrimian Khairig, Papa Khrimian, told the Ark Guides to carry all the artifacts into the Republic of Georgia. Now, this is very interesting. There were different ranks to the militia members and to the guides to the Ark. Now, a lot of these Ark guides were also militia members of militias like Sevkach, or the Black Cross, or Dashnak was another popular militia. And the older ones that were the fiercer warriors were able to get their share of what they considered to be the most pristine artifacts. Now, what's interesting is these individuals chose the pottery, the ceramic artifacts, while the lower ranking ones had to deal with the stone artifacts, wood artifacts, and some of the cages that were ripped off the walls of the interior of Noah's Ark. But this created a really interesting scenario, because the pottery was from the small worship areas at the entrances to the site, while the stones that were really discounted by the Ark guides were actually the more important artifacts archaeologically, and were given or were received by the younger members of the guides that didn't have the ranking or the fierceness of the Armenian fedai, or the militia members. So in a juxtaposition, it was the younger members of the militia that got the more interesting and ancient artifacts from the interior of the Ark, where many of the more powerful with higher ranks in the militia got the lesser important, namely the ceramic artifacts from near the entrances to the interior of Noah's Ark. Now, the third order that Khrimian Khairig, the Catholicos, said as he was near death was for the Ark guides and their descendants to lead people away from Noah's Ark, which was located in the southern gorge of Greater Mount Ararat. That's why Aratunov in the 1910s, Hagopian in the 1970s, Arthur Chuchian in the 1980s, all say that Noah's Ark is on the north side of the mountain, the saddle on the west side of the mountain, or near the cliffs on the east side of the mountain. The one area that Armenians are not mentioning is the southern gorge of Greater Mount Ararat, because that's where Noah's Ark is located. And this is very obvious because all the Armenian hamlets going from the bottom to near the highest plateau are located near the southern gorge. Also, all the pathways, as we talked about in a previous discussion, are coalescing in the southern gorge right at the top of the highest plateau. Also, all the art and iconography from the Catholicos always points to the Ark, the top of the southern gorge, on a plateau beneath the summit of Greater Mount Ararat, which is where the most pristine loci or archaeological contexts are located. So again, this misdirection, this effort to misdirect foreigners, non-Armenians, non-Armenian elites that were not tied to the Catholicos or not approved by the Armenian Apostolic Church, has had a lasting effect. A lot of Ark searchers are constantly looking for the Ark on the north side, on the west side, on the east side. And these are very dangerous areas, covered with cliffs. And it goes against what is said in the Bible and in the Qur'an, that the Ark rested on the mountains of Mount Ararat, or rested on Al-Judii, the highest mountain. There is no rest in the western, eastern, or northern sides of Greater Mount Ararat. Also, God says in Genesis for Noah to descend with the animals and be fruitful and multiply. And in the Qur'an, it mentions, Yanuhu bilkul bisalami. O Noah, descend with peace. Well, there's no peaceful descents in the northern, eastern, and western side of the mountain. Only in the southern side do you not only have a more gradual descent, but also the floor of the southern gorge is covered with sand-like glacial scree. And I've fallen in it, and nothing happens. It's like falling down a soft sand dune. So this is the only place where the animals and Noah could descend with peace. But you can see the effect of this Armenian direction started or originated by Khrimian Khairig to mislead foreigners and individuals that were not approved by the Catholicos away from the true location of Noah's Ark in the southern gorge of Greater Mount Ararat. The fourth order that Khrimian mentioned was for the agents of the office of the Catholicos to travel to Turkey each year to make sure that no one was detrimentally affecting Noah's Ark in the southern gorge, to monitor the southern gorge, to make sure that no one was looting from the site, no one was stealing from the site, and to ensure that the general welfare of the Ark was protected. Now, in today's modern environment, Armenians are always there on the mountain, and the Turks resent it. They always try to prevent them from going, and they really scrutinize the names of the individuals that are applying for Tursab visas. And Tursab is the need tourist visa in order to climb the mountain. But what Armenians do, especially from the office of the Catholicos, is they get together with Kurdish guides that try to sidestep and not submit documentation into Tursab and climb anyway. This is more of a problem now, because now Turkey, the Gendarme Militarici, the military police, are scrutinizing everyone that goes on the mountain. And there's drones flying over the location of the Ark. There's also roving patrols. And recently, a battalion-sized camp was established 1,000 meters below Noah's Ark. The gendarme check everyone's visas and then make sure they don't go into the gorge to detrimentally affect the Ark. What has this done? First of all, Mkrtich Khrimian did this to protect the Ark and to protect the artifacts. But in essence, what happened was the exact opposite. All these artifacts, up to 1,500, as told by the descendants of the Ark Guides, were removed from the site, destroying forever the context of where these artifacts were located. The good news is that there's many contexts that have not been affected by external forces. The other issue is that the site is now detrimentally affected because there's been some recent artifact removal. And even worse is the fact that increasing temperatures have melted the glacial ice and permafrost around Greater Mount Ararat as much as 50%. And so what was previously encased in ice is now subject to the withering decomposition, wood rot, and the termination of many of the organic artifacts. So even though the Turkish government is now protecting the site, what's needed is an emergency effort by conservationists and archaeologists to preserve not only the organic architecture, but also the organic artifacts, the wood, the basketry, and the wood bowls that are covered with clay, which form the origin of ceramic manufacturing. And why is this important? Noah's Ark is a foundational belief to three world religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And Noah's Ark predates any of the schisms between the Sunni and the Shia Ali side of Islam. Also, Noah's Ark represents the ultimate, the apogee, the highest technological extent and developments of the end of the Stone Age, perfectly preserved in this 158-meter long barge. It also represents the beginning, the progenitor, the origin of the Neolithic Revolution. So Noah's Ark is so important to both faith and science. Thank you.